Hello and welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to the prolific Mike Gayle. Published 20 novels which have been translated into over 30 languages. You can hear why through all of that time it's his chair that reminds him how hard the work is.
That chair is evidence of me turning up every day. And I think it's just a really beautiful reminder. That's how you write a novel. You turn up every day. It's not about the amount of, it's not about you putting in whole days and trying to write 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words in a day. It's just about turning up regularly and doing your little bit. And if you keep turning up and if you keep doing it regularly, sooner or later, you're going to find yourself typing the end.
And we get into why he's quite particular about how it looks.
When it comes to fonts, I am a real stickler, so it has to be Helvetica. It can't be anything else. I feel really distracted if something is in a different font. Now, I can't quite say why I find Helvetica so pleasing, but it's the only one that I will write in. And I write in 12-point, double-spaced as well. And again, for me, that's what a written page looks like. And if I see anything else, it just throws me completely off.
It's all on the way in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine with Mike Gayle. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan Simpson, this is Writer's Routine. Thank you so much for bearing with me through the last week, mini hiatus. This week we're with Mike Gayle. We try to get to the bottom of his writing day. We uncover where, when and how he does things. Now, Mike's career started in journalism. Starting out with Agony Uncle columns and writing for teen magazines in the heyday of the 90s and the noughties. Is it a mini hiatus? A hiatus is just a little break, isn't it? Anyway, magazines, teen magazines in the heyday of the 90s and noughties. And that taught him to simply get the words down. Don't drag stuff out. Know your audience. Make it entertaining. And now he writes mostly feel-good love stories. Published 20 novels which regularly land in the Sunday Times Bestseller List. They've been translated into over 30 languages. He was the first male writer to win the Romantic Novelists Association's Outstanding Achievement Award, which in itself is a little different. I've been doing this podcast a little while now, chatted to over 350 authors, and I'm racking my brains. I can't remember a male author who has written relationship novels, uplit, so prolifically. So we dive into that. His new one is a novella. It's the one that got away. It's all about Ruben and the love of his life who is getting married, only to someone else. And then when an unexpected phone call changes his carefully laid plans to distract him from the wedding, he's forced to face the truth about what it really is that he's trying to outrun. We talk about why Mike started loosely and has since tightened up, about his thorough plotting, not just the beginning, the middle and the end of the whole piece, but the beginning, the middle of the end of chapters too. You can hear why he's a big collector of things and the little roadblocks that puts into his day. And with someone so prolific, we get into the reads of, does every second need to produce something tangible? I don't know if you feel this way with the current zeitgeist of work and hustle. Like, do we always need to be on? Can that ever be a good thing? Perhaps is this podcast part of the problem? We run through all of that with Mike Gayle, and we start, as we always do, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
It's a little bit embarrassing. So when we moved in this house, let me think, probably about 15 years ago, and the plan was that I was going to, it's a double fronted house, I was going to have this kind of large room downstairs, and it had, kind of bay windows, and it was going to be beautiful. And I was in there for about a month, I think, and then we decided to kind of have a rearrange. But in that time, I was going to have my daughter's bedroom, and my daughter in that time we painted her bedroom, and it's she wanted this kind of she chose this kind of pink glittery paint for the walls. And so on two walls, I've got pink glittery paint that when I moved into this room, I said to myself, oh, I'll paint that at some point. And 15 years later, it's still there, but I can't see it anymore, really. So, what can I see? I've got so straight ahead of me, I've got my computer that when I sit and write every day. On the wall there's a year planner. I'm quite a visual person, so I kind of there's no point in giving me a week at a time. I need to kind of see how everything relates to everything else. So there is a wall planner there. Above there's a shelf that's got some photos and some I remember it's got a framed print of not a print, a framed photocopy of number one, my very first number one slot that I got, and my agent's assistant very kindly sent it in the post, but didn't use his brains and sent it in a glass frame, so it broke. So I had to buy another one. And to the left of me, there is a Banksy print, which I bought probably about 25 years ago. And to on the windowsill, there is there's a skull that the writer Jenny Colgan bought me for, I think it was a Secret Santa, and I've put a hat on it, and so it looks at me across from there. Then turning, there's a window that looks out into the garden, and then there's a drawing of me that my youngest daughter did when she must have been about 6 or 7, and somehow it made it to my wall and has stayed there. And what I really love about it is that for some reason I've got silver hands, which is lovely. Then above that there is a lovely kind of framed print photo thing that my publishers did to celebrate my 25th anniversary with them. So it says 25 years of Mike Gayle, all of my book covers, and it says emotions you'll never forget, stories you'll want to share. And then behind me is my bookshelf. At the bottom is all the kind of boring stuff, all the accountant stuff and receipts and various things. And then above that is all the books. Some of my books straight ahead, but a lot of other people's books as well. A lot of proofs that have been sent by various people. And above that is what I like to call it's not a toy collection, but it is a toy collection.
Okay, no, that's fine. You're dancing around this quite well, Mike.
Yes, I am. So basically, it's a collection of things that I bought, things that I wanted when I was about, let me think, things that I wanted when I was about 9 or 10 that I really wanted and never got, and which I then subsequently bought myself during the halcyon days of eBay, where you could get some real bargains. So there's a Godzilla, as a toy Godzilla on wheels, and when he moves around, his tongue comes out. There's a $6 million man, kind of space vehicle of some description. There's a Stretch Armstrong still in its box. There's an electronic Starbird vehicle, which I also wanted when I was young. And then there's some boxing robots, and there's a boxed Xena Warrior Princess doll that I think I didn't get that off eBay. I think I got given that when I was working at Top of the Pops magazine. And then behind me, there's a chair which I never sit in, but which has got, it's just, stuff just ends up getting stuck there. Then behind that, so it's a bit of a dumping ground. And then behind that is a is a poster from the my very first event, when I did my very first US book tour for my legendary girlfriend at Barnes and Noble. So that's quite nice, and it's quite a large one, so I've got that framed. And then above that is my collection of uh, hats. I'm very much a hat wearer, so there's baseball caps and woolly hats and all manner of hats. And then there's a clock above the door, and then finally coming fully all the way round. There's my on the wall is my honorary doctorate that I was awarded back in 2022 from my old university, Salford University. So, which relates to something that's just underneath my computer, where it says, my wife very kindly got me, in celebration of this fact, got me a little kind of desk plaque that says, Dr. Mike Gayle.
Are you in that space right now, Mike?
I am indeed, yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say that was the most remarkable photographic memory I've ever seen.
Yes.
I've got so many questions to ask about the space. So you've done the dream of, you've wanted all these toys when you were young, and I will call them toys if that's okay.
Okay, yes.
You've wanted all these things, and for one reason or another, you can't get them all. You grow up. You've got autonomy, you've got a few quid in the bank, and you've got access to eBay. So you just, you get everything you want. Did it feel rewarding that you were finally able to get those? Or was it a bit like, oh, okay. This wasn't the dream that I thought it would be, actually?
It was rewarding, but I also remember that it was very much a displacement activity. So it kind of coincided with this was let me think, it must have been, it's like the very early days of eBay, because I was aware of eBay, but I'd never had a go on it, and then some friends were telling me about it, and so I went on there, and I suddenly discovered that you could just buy all of these things, and I ended up kind of looking at everything that used to be in the kind of Argus catalogue in kind of 1980, and that I would kind of drool over, and suddenly they were all there and you could buy them. And it was fun, and it was great to get all these packages, because it wasn't just packages from the UK, it was packages from the United States, and coming all over the place. But it dawned on me after a while that actually it was very much a displacement activity. I think it very much related to the fact that I was at home all day on my own. And, when you get to a difficult part in a book, you kind of just think to yourself, oh, I wonder what's on eBay. And so you'd end up kind of rewarding yourself. And so for that brief window, and well, I say brief window, it's probably about a year or two, this collection of things kept kind of coming on a kind of daily or semi-daily basis, and then you kind of think to yourself, well, yeah, it's all very nice, but what are you going to do with this stuff? And the kind of 10-year-old, the 10-year-old that still lives within me, was very delighted to kind of have these things, but at the same time, I was like thinking, yeah, they're nice, but okay, what are you going to do with them? You're not, you're a grown man with kids. You're not going to play with them. But there was a certain sort of satisfaction of having them. But I think it kind of appealed to I have a little bit of a completist kind of spirit. I'm very much a collector. One of the things I missed out was just below the shelf, one of the shelves, there's a whole shelf dedicated to comics, because I spent a lot of my kind of late teens and early 20s buying comics. I also spent most of my late teens and early 20s buying um, vinyl and CDs. So all of that is downstairs. So there's very much a kind of a collector's spirit in me. And the downside of that is that, all of this stuff takes space. And so I try not to collect quite as much, but it's something that is very, very, very deep within me.
In your very thorough description of your room around you, um, and you mentioned that you are like a visual person, what struck me is that there didn't seem to be much to relate to the story that you might be working on in the future. So is there anything there like plotting or post-it notes or a big spreadsheet that lets you know what you need to be doing when?
Um, well, not, yes, there is, but not on the walls. So on the wall, there is um, there's a character outline for the current book that I'm working on. And so that's just got some kind of key details about when people were born, when people met, and everybody's names and ages. And that's, I've just noticed that on the wall actually. So that's quite nice. But because that's a book that I've just finished working on. I've sent it to my agent and editors. We're due to get notes back next week. Um, but that was helping me during the process of writing this book. Then there's I had missed this out actually. There's a I do I do like to kind of, it's not my kind of it's not quite live laugh love life laugh or whatever it is, but it's I've got a quote over I've got two quotes over my desk. One is that says simply, "What can I learn from this?" Uh, um, and the other has got a quote. I think I'm trying to remember where it came from. It says, "We often make choices based on immediate outcomes. What can I do to experience a little joy in the next 30 minutes? What can I accomplish in the next hour? But if you always expect to get a little reward for a little bit of effort, then you often overlook actions that lead to greater payoffs down the road. The relationship between input and output is rarely linear. The course of action that could prove greater happiness, meaning also satisfaction in the long run, may not make you happy in the next 30 minutes." And actually, I suppose that in a lot of ways kind of relates to the whole eBay thing from way back. Um, that kind of relates to the eBay thing going way back, because I suppose what that is saying is that you know I feel like writing so hard that I kind of I was rewarding myself for the writing, but the downside of that is that I've got a house that's full of junk and or collectible items that are accruing in value, but you know it doesn't always have to be about immediate gratification. And certainly if I've kind of grown away from that, and I try not to do that, and it means that A, there's a little bit more space in the house, and B, there's a little bit more money in the bank.
Let's just run through some of the technicals quite quickly, because we're very interested in the niche nerdiness of what you're writing on. So you've got the screen, you've got your computer. What software do you use? And quite crucially, what are your favourite fonts? Do you have any strong opinions there?
Oh, yes, I have a very strong opinions on fonts. So I'm working on an Apple Mac that I've had for getting on for it must be 6 or 7 years, and it's one of the all-in-one iMacs, and it's the 27-inch screen, which is beautiful. So it's really big, and but at the same time, it's getting to the end of its life, and I have had several conversations. I've gone into the Apple Store several times now, and they don't do the 27-inch anymore. And so, if you want a 27-inch, you have to have a separate. They do a separate screen and a separate. You have to have the kind of Mac Mini, and I just don't want it. And it's really, really, really frustrating because I don't really like getting new computers because you get your computer exactly the way you like it. And then Apple came up with this way of essentially just making you could just connect your computers and seamlessly shift one thing to the other so that it even looked like an exact copy of your computer. Um, but I just know that if I do this, it's going to be a real pain, and I'm just fighting against it. But the downsides of that is that it haven't. I'm not using the latest operating system, and I Google Chrome has stopped working on it as well. And I know that it's just going to be a matter of days until I kind of have to get a new one. But it's such a pain. And as far as what I use, I've always used Mac. So I started off as a journalist, and even as a student journalist, we use Macs, and so it's the only thing I know. And I use Word. It's very boring. I used to use, I think, back in the day, I used Claris Works that used to kind of come with Macs, and then I did try using the kind of Mac writing soft, the kind of their version of Word. Didn't really like it, and then I went the whole hog and went to Word. And I, when it comes to fonts, I am a real stickler, so it has to be Helvetica. It can't be anything else. I feel really distracted if something is in a different font. I can't quite say why I find Helvetica so pleasing, but it's the only one that I will write in, and I write in 12 point double spaced as well. And again, for me, that's what a written page looks like. And if I see anything else, it just throws me completely off. So my wife gets up first. She gets up about 6, and I get up about I I wake up about 25 minutes past 6, and then I'll spend a little bit of time trying to get out of bed. And then and it takes longer and longer. Every time I take a holiday, it just takes longer and longer to kind of, right, I've got to get out of bed. I'm very much a morning person. And so one of the rules that I've got is to try and do everything that I can, um, try and lock it in, I suppose. So I try to go to the gym first thing in the morning, um, before I have chance to kind of think about doing anything else to kind of make sure I get some physical exercise in. And so I'll go to the gym, and I'll do half an hour to 45 minutes at the gym. Then I'll come back, and have a shower, and I'll try to be at my desk for 8 o'clock. Then at 8 o'clock, I'll start writing. And again, I suppose it all depends on where I am within my kind of writing schedule. So if I'm I'm very much a planner. So uh, if if I'm at the planning stage, I might not come to my desk. I might sit downstairs or get a table and have lots of pieces of paper and do my kind of thinking and planning work there. But if I'm writing, then I'll sit at the desk and I will, um, yeah, I'll be sat at my desk looking at my computer, and I'll set myself the challenge of I'll try and write across a morning. I'll try and write maybe somewhere between 1,800 words and 2,400 words. Um, Within that, I'll take breakfast at about. Um, I try to kind of see how far I can go without breakfast. So I might manage to go till about 10 o'clock, and then I'll go downstairs and have breakfast and maybe have breakfast with my wife. And then as soon as I'm done, I'll come back and I'll come back and start working again. I'll try and finish by about 1 o'clock, mainly because I've learned over the years that I've been doing this for 26 years now, and I've learned that I've really, as I said, I'm very much a morning person, and I've probably only got about 5 good writing hours in me, after which I'm completely spent. So at 1 o'clock, I'll stop and I'll just do anything that doesn't involve looking at a screen. So that might be taking a walk with my wife, or um, running some errands, or when we had a dog, taking the dog for a walk.
When that's done, when the dogs are done for a walk, when you are quite creatively spent, uh, how much is whatever you're working on just kind of percolating away, sorting itself out when you're not directly focusing on it?
I think there's a huge amount, and I think this is the. I was reading something about this, or I was listening to something. I can't remember what it was, like whether it was a podcast or a book, but they were saying that very same thing about your how your creative mind works, and you can kind of convince yourself, because we live in a world where work kind of almost, you feel like work needs to be kind of tangible, and so if it doesn't look like work, then you kind of dismiss it. But actually, so much of writing gets done away from the keyboard, and gets, and the minute you free your brain up to, you're not putting any pressure on yourself, and you're just doing other things, it feels like your brain is just working away in the background, thinking about problems, thinking about solutions to problems that you didn't even think you knew. It's so amazing, and I think that's why it's vital to kind of give yourself time to breathe with writing. That I think that kind of I feel that deadlines can be the kind of the death of creativity, because if you're always thinking about the deadline, then you're never really giving yourself room to kind of think and to kind of fix things. And I think the real beauty of writing is that you can, so much of, if you get into a good rhythm, your writing kind of feeds your thinking time, and your thinking time feeds your writing time, and you get a really nice rhythm going between the two. But without the thinking time, you don't get the writing time. The writing time can become a real slog, and without the kind of writing time, you just get this backlog of ideas that you kind of need to get down on the paper.
Just to expand on that, I completely get what you're talking about with that feel at the moment that work particularly needs to be tangible. We kind of exist what with social media and everything like that, and I'm sure this podcast plays an infinitesimal part of the problem, where you need to kind of always be on, and we're in this era of hustle porn, and that if you're not working, if you're not doing, you're lagging behind. And I know I work as a freelance, right, across audio and writing and radio and stuff like that. And sometimes and the reason I do that is because I didn't want a 9 to 5 job, but the balminess of the situation is I still keep to 9 to 5 hours. And like, if it's 4, I'll be sending out meaningless emails just to make it seem like I'm doing something. So the question is, how in your 26-year career, published 20 novels now, successfully, how long did it kind of take you to realize that you didn't always need to be switched on, fingers on keyboard, getting that done?
Well, it's interesting actually, that you say that you're freelance, because I'd been freelance when I got my first book deal, and I'd I kind of took that mentality in with me because, when you're freelance, you're always thinking about your next job because, there's no guarantee of work. You've always got to be hustling. You can't say no to anything because you don't know that they might kind of form a different relationship with a new freelancer. So you're always, in a sense, running scared. And
And sorry to cut in, it's almost like it's the three timeline problem,
yes,
isn't it? It's you're thinking of what you're doing tomorrow, what you're doing next month to make money, but also what you're doing next year. Where do you want to end up? You know?
exactly. So you're doing all of that. And I think I took that kind of mentality in with me uh, into when I got this opportunity to become a full-time author. I remember sitting down and thinking to myself, right, I don't know how long any of this is going to last. So I probably need to keep a finger in journalism just in case. I also need to treat this book like a 9 to 5 thing because it's not going to write itself. And so this was the mentality that I kind of went into. I was going to treat it like it was a job. And I remember it took me probably about a week of sitting down at 8 o'clock in the morning and forcing myself to stay there till about 4 or 5, but being miserable at the end of those days, each and every day, to kind of realize that actually, when I was looking back at my week of productivity, what I was seeing was a lot of work in the early hours and then not much work in the afternoon, not enough to kind of to make it worth how miserable it was making me just sort of sitting there. And so actually I realized quite quickly on that the key, I think, to writing is little and often. And so it's funny, one of the other things I could have described about my office is my writing chair. And I got this chair from IKEA, maybe, I think it was about 15, 16 years ago. And honestly, if you see this chair, it's the sort of thing that it looks like I found it in a skip. Um, there are all the kind of fabrics ripped, and you can see the kind of sponges kind of exposed beneath, and it's really tatty looking. And my kids take the mick out of me, and they were like, "Dad, why don't you just buy a new chair?" And I said, "No, because that chair is evidence of me turning up every day." And I think it's just a really beautiful reminder. That's how you write a novel. You turn up every day. It's not about the amount of, it's not about you putting in whole days and trying to write 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words in a day. It's just about turning up regularly and doing your little bit. And if you keep turning up and if you keep doing it regularly, sooner or later, you're going to find yourself typing the end.
Yeah, it's such a prosaic way of saying it. Just let me take you back to the day. So you've got a good 5 hours of writing there. On a day when you're not planning, when you are fingers on the keyboard, is there is there an aim for those 5 hours? Are you doing word count? Is it by pages? Is it just a point of the story?
It'll be a chapter. So I tend to break down, I'll have broken down my whole story. In my planning, I'll broken down into chapters. And so each day I try and write a chapter. So I'll come in at the beginning of a chapter and I'm trying to make it all the way to an end point. And because I know because I'm quite a planner, so I know not only before I write a single word, I know not just the beginning, middle, and end of the book, but I also know the beginning, middle, and end of each chapter. And so for me, it's about bringing my kind of chapter outlines to life. So there'll be a chapter outline, and this would be so I'll have already thought about what this chapter needs to achieve and what point I need to get to. And this is me fleshing that out and making it real and making it and kind of putting in um, everything that it needs to kind of make it kind of live and breathe.
Just a couple on that thorough planning. Um, is that something that you have always done? Did you maybe start a bit looser?
Oh yes, I started very loose. I when I wrote My Legendary Girlfriend, so I didn't have a book contract. This was just me wanting to write a novel. So I was working as a freelance journalist for various magazines in the kind of teen industry. So everything from Top of the Pops magazine through to Just 17 and things like that.
And in like the heyday, Mike, sorry to cut in again, in like the heyday of, from what I can make out, this would have been what, 90s, noughties. So that
Yes, so this was kind of the kind of mid 90s, the absolute kind of heyday of pop music. So it was such a fantastic time.
and that must have taught you so much about getting the words out, right? I mean, you have to be quick, and those you're writing to an audience that doesn't want 3,000 word think pieces. You need to get your point across.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think what writing for teens taught me was to be entertaining. Exactly like you say. They don't want 3,000 word think pieces. They want things that are entertaining, and so I think that kind of fed directly into my writing. That I was writing very much about to be entertaining and engaging, and that was the kind of thing that was most important to me.
And then also, from chatting to so many authors doing this, both plotters and pantsers, I know that sometimes it doesn't matter how much you plot. The characters do what they want, and especially the type of stories that you write, which is so character led. How can you be certain if you're plotting the beginning, the middle, of the end of chapters that these characters are going to do what you want them to?
Well, it's interesting. So the reason why I became a plotter was because so I started, as I said, with Manager Girlfriend. I was just writing and just seeing where it went, and I was so pleased that I got to the end of a chapter, I managed to write a first draft that I just went back and redrafted it a million times. And then, so when I got my first book deal, I was then working on my second book. And I used so this was the first time that I kind of had a deadline in mind. And I just didn't know. I had no idea whether I could write to a deadline. And as it turned out, without planning, yes, I could write to a deadline. I could, and I got the book done within the time that it kind of took. The reason I started planning was because it's probably about 15 years ago. Again, I was working on a book that became Turning 40. So it's my very first sequel, and I I was working on this book, and I spent a year working on it, and just using my kind of normal, the process that had worked for me every single time before. And writing this book was like pulling teeth. There was just something about it that just wasn't working. And it took me a year, but I got there in the end. And I remember typing the end and just thinking that was a struggle, and I don't know why that was. And as soon as I typed the end, it kind of dawned on me like my brain had just been just hovering over me and just kind of tutting at me. I got to the end and I realised that I'd written. It was the right characters, and it was kind of the right premise, but it was the wrong story, completely the wrong story. And this is the one and only time that I've ever junked a book, and I was really gutted. And one of the things I quickly discerned was, had I done a plan for this, had I written this out and had a bit of a plan, I would have realised very quickly why it wasn't working, because I could have gone, oh, actually, this is not the story that you wanted to tell, because it's going off in this direction, and that is not the direction you actually wanted to go, because this is the story that you want to take. You actually want to take. And so essentially what had happened is I'd gone down a diversion, and that diversion had just taken me away from where I really wanted to be. And so I sat down and thought about what I wanted this story to be, wrote out a plan. And from that point onwards, I've always done plans. And I actually think it's a really I think people think it's a kind of it's quite a rigid and quite unyielding kind of way of writing, but actually it's the opposite, because what it means is I do my discovering of who my characters are on sheets of paper. So I can think about who they are. I can think about situations. I can think all of these things through logically, rather than committing myself to writing about them on the page. Because the thing is, once you commit yourself to writing things in the page, you are less likely to correct them, because all you see is the work that you've done rather than what is right for the story. Whereas if I'm just dealing with scraps of pieces of paper and thinking and trying out ideas, trying them on for size, I like this, I don't like that, I like this, I don't like that, it means that I can throw away anything at all and not feel the slightest qualm about it, because it's just a sheet of paper and I've only spent maybe an hour or a couple of hours thinking about it. But the other thing that this means is that when I come, so having done all of my thinking in relation to the novel before I sit down, I've written a single word. When I come to write, I know who my characters are, and I know what they want, and I know where they live, and I know what they look like, and I know everything about them because I've done all of this work. It's almost like, I suppose the best way kind of analogy is like, I've been on loads of dates with them, and it's like going on a date. You've been on loads of dates, you've got to know each other, and you've kind of said to yourself, yeah, okay, I know you well enough, let's get married. And the marriage part is committing to writing their story. I feel like the opposite of that, being a pantser, is going up to some random person and just saying, hi, you look cute, let's get hitched and commit ourselves, and let's see where this goes. And it's just like, which of us would do that in real life? So I feel like I need to kind of get to know my characters and situations, and so I've done a lot of thinking before I write a single word.
Back with more from Mike in just a sec. If you're liking the cut of his jib and the sound of his work, you can get a copy of his books. Use the link in the episode notes that will take you through to our bookshop.org page. And thank you very much, by the way. I'm seeing books I'm seeing that maybe you are buying books through bookshop.org that aren't ones on the show, but it's kind of using my link, and through strange technological means, the podcast is getting a little kickback. So thank you if that's you. By supporting us on bookshop.org, by buying through there, stuff comes to me, to the author, and your local independent bookshop. So I think it really boosts the whole ecosystem of writing. You can also support us over on Patreon and Ko-Fi by pledging one-off or with a rolling amount. It helps this show carry on. It helps me keep bringing you the podcast as often as I can. To make that happen, again, links are in the episode notes for Patreon and for Ko-Fi. Whatever you can give goes an extraordinarily long way. I'd love to see you support us there. Let's get back to it then with Mike Gayle, chatting about The One That Got Away. We discuss how he came to write a novella, and whether he had to change anything about the story, or was it perfectly suited to the size. I'm figuring out, in the process of doing this show, that for a lot of creatives, ideas suit the medium, which I think is a really good way of thinking about it, of not being hamstrung by what has gone before, or maybe what the industry wants you to do. There's all sorts of ways to get your stuff out there in however long or short it needs to be. We also talk about what Mike has learned from 26 years of being published, and we dive back in talking about the nature of his books, right? Mike tells stories about relationships. Some may call them romance, uplit. Many people might think that's a little bit unusual. How does he feel about that?
I've never liked being pigeonholed. Even as a kid, I never really liked being pigeonholed. And I remember when I used to go to the library, I was my my reading was just so varied. You know, one week I'd be reading Agatha Christie's, the next week I'd be reading footballers' biographies. I think I was just interested in stories of all kinds, and it never really occurred to me to kind of, I sometimes I kind of hear or read about people who say, "Oh, I never read male authors," or "I never read female authors." And I'm just like, who are these people? It would never occur to me not to read a book, be it because of, the kind of gender of the author. You just think, well, I'm interested in stories, and so it never occurred to me that there are things that you shouldn't do for whatever reason. And so when I went into journalism, when I went into teen journalism, um, it made complete sense to me because I'd grown up reading smash hits, and a lot of the writers that I respected at that time had all, whether they went on to write for broadsheets or whether they got on to become pop stars or whatever, they had all started in teen journalism, and their writing was always entertaining and really thoughtful. And that's the sort of writing that I wanted to do. And so for me, um, writing about all the kind of all the kind of films that I was really passionate about, kind of mid period Woody Allen stuff, and things like When Harry Met Sally, and kind of the 90s kind of slacker movies. Um, they were all, in essence, films about relationships. And so you kind of got these writing for teens. I was already interested in writing about relationships. And also, I was a young man in London. Um, you know, so again, relationships were always kind of, on my mind. And so I kind of, when I wrote My Legendary Girlfriend, I wanted to write about the things that were going on in my life and the things that were pertinent. So it just seemed a completely natural move to be writing about relationships, because relationships are the things that kind of make things go, that keeps the world spinning. We all want relationships. Who doesn't? What kind of monster are you? And so to me, it never rang true that men shouldn't be or couldn't be interested in relationships. And yes, I get it that we might come from it from a slightly different angle, but you called it, you called the genre romance, and I suppose when I first started out, I wouldn't have thought of it as being romance. I would have thought about being about relationships, and so that those were the sorts of books that I wanted to write. I, but across my writing, across 26 years, I think the my early books were kind of focused on getting together, um, and I suppose that similarly was the kind of focus of my kind of my life at the time as well, was kind of looking to kind of find a partner and settle down and things like that. But then I suppose my perspective as I've grown older, and I've got married and I've had kids, and life has changed. So have my books. So my books now, I wouldn't quite say are romance in the same. There are relate, but kind of just about the kind of getting together. They're more about, I suppose, kind of family relationships and family dynamics, as well, and interesting. So I've got, so if you look at you know, my legendary girlfriend is about a guy can't get over his ex-girlfriend, whereas cut to 20 odd years later, you've got Half a World Away, which is about a single mum getting in touch with her half brother, who she hasn't seen since they were taken into care when they were when they were youngsters. And so it's there's a common thread of relationships, but not always directly romantic relationships.
Do you now this may be me generalizing somewhat. Um, it would appear the publishing industry feels that uh, because you being a male writer of this of these types of stories, because they see that as being quite unusual, that perhaps not a lot of men read them. And I don't know if that's true or not. As I say, I might be generalizing. Do you feel like when you're writing, you are conscious of that? You're conscious of who the main bulk of your readership might be?
It's interesting. I, I try not to be because apart from anything, because I've been writing for so long. I know that the people who have been with me from the beginning are are with me because of the way that I write, not because I'm a man, and not necessarily because they're with me because I tell the kind of stories in a way that they want to hear those stories, and that to me is my kind of my USP. So yes, and so while you might have there are lots of women um, writing stories in this kind of end of publishing. I suppose I kind of come at it at a slightly because I come at it as a slightly different angle. I suppose I stand out a little bit more, and I'm not, but I don't try to. Um, I'm conscious that I've got a female readership, but my female readership like the way that I write, and so it feels like they trust me to kind of get on with what I do. And one of the interesting things about being a male writing in this space is that I always say that my job as an author is to write believable characters, no matter whether So it's not just me, kind of distilling my life onto the page. It's me creating believable characters. And the number of times I've had people, especially after I wrote Half a World Away, people saying, I didn't realize you were a man until I got to the end of the book. And I was just like, well, why? I'm an author. My job as an author is to create believable characters. The fact that you believed in this female character to such an extent that you thought I had to be a female author is really interesting, because all it means is I've done my job really well, and that presumably there are people out there doing their job badly. But I can create believable female characters because that is really important to me as an author. But it should be important to all authors. All authors should be able to create believable male characters and female characters. It shouldn't just be down to, oh, this is a man and therefore he should write about men, and this is the woman and therefore she should write about women. I just think, it's like saying, oh, I want to be a portrait painter, but and then go, oh yeah, but I don't do noses. It's like ridiculous. You've got to, if you're going to be an author, you've got to be able to create believable characters of whatever gender.
Well, your so the new work you've published is a novella. It's called The One That Got Away. We'll talk about that in just a second, the specifics of the story. But another slightly interesting tweak is that you've published it through Amazon Original Stories, and this is an imprint where big names have published on it as well. Dean Koontz, Ian Rankin, and Ruth Ware. So big names. Yet it's not, I guess, seen in as traditional publishing still. So why as someone who's published so many novels, why is this where your new novella has landed?
Well, the thing was, and it's really lovely of them actually. They approached my agent. I think I think it was at London Book Fair, yeah, and said, we'd really love Mike to do an Amazon original for us. Um, has he got any ideas? Let's talk about it. And my agent passed this on, and I said, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. And then I completely forgot about it. And then they gave my agent a bit of a nudge. And my agent then gave me a bit of a nudge. And then I suddenly thought to myself, okay, all right, I'm going to do this. And what was, it was kind of, I was talking to another author about this recently, how you had there are ideas sometimes that you just can't seem to let go of, and they kind of come into your head and they leave, and you try to make them work and they don't work and all sorts of things. And I'd had an idea called that had been that I'd called in my head things to do on the day that your ex is getting married, because I just thought it was a really beautiful idea of what would you do? How do you keep yourself entertained? I could see there'd be a real dilemma in there. And I kept thinking about, and I tried a couple of times to try and turn it into a novel, and it just, for lots of different reasons, it just didn't seem to work. And then when I had this lovely offer from Amazon, I just thought, actually, this is actually perfect, because the thing about Amazon Originals is that they're not just short stories in terms of like 1,000 words or 1,500 words, or 2,000 words, which I find short stories really really difficult. But this is more of a novella size, and I've never written anything like it before. And you've got a space of about 20,000 words. And I thought to myself, actually, do you know what? This might be perfect for things to do on the day your ex gets married. And so I wrote an outline and gave it to my agent, who passed it on to Amazon. They said, "We absolutely love this. We want you to write it." And so I had I had a blast writing it. It was it was just so much fun, because it was, I felt like it was I was just suddenly engaging a completely different part of my brain. So instead of thinking about the kind of rhythms of writing a novel, and all the thing, it takes a lot. Door to door, you're looking roughly about a year. This was kind of much snappier, and was was kind of giving back. Was every day just kind of felt like, oh, that was a lot of fun. And then, and I think part of that was because much shorter chapters, but it was still, one of the things when I agreed to do this, I said I didn't want to write a kind of a short story that kind of felt like, I don't know, it didn't feel too kind of ponderous. I wanted it to be a really plotty, fast-moving short story. And because of the 20K kind of word limit, it meant that I could do that. I could have this fun but quick page-turnery read that you can really, really immediately get into.
Let's just talk about the plotting of that then, Mike, very quickly. You've already discussed that you like to know the beginning and the middle of the end, not just of the whole thing, but of each individual chapter. When you knew that you had 20,000 words to play with, how much did that change what you plot? Were you trying to get this entire idea and squash it down as tight as possible, or did you think, you know what, let's just see a snapshot of that idea this time?
Well, no, this is what I'm saying. It was actually, the idea was perfect for this format. So the one that got away, it means, because of the way it was, I plotted it, we get this really quick setup, and then we can get into the story really quickly, with all the kind of complications that kind of happen across this day. And it was just, so it was actually, it was just like the perfect format for it. It was, it kind of, yeah, snappy. And so long story short, I outlined it in this exactly the same way I would a novel, but it just meant that my book was kind of set up quite quickly. And when I was thinking about ideas about where to go with it, I planned all of those in. And what's nice also about kind of having a kind of a plan is that other people can you can. It's a way of having a document that you can actually talk about your story before it's written. So generally speaking, so I sent out this idea that I had for the book that became the one that got away, sent to my agent and editor, and so that meant that they could talk about and feedback to me about something that didn't actually exist yet. And so because of that, I could kind of then make tweaks and say, oh, right, okay, so they might have spotted a problem that I hadn't seen. And so I can kind of tweak that and tweak that and tweak that there. So it means that when I go into the writing, I'm doing less tweaking on the page and it's just a pure adrenaline rush of just writing this really funny, warm, entertaining story.
And then thinking of the future, how much has what you did for the novella, maybe different ways of doing it, being a bit snappier in places, still after 20 novels, 26 years of doing this, what have you learned from doing that maybe might help you get novels away in the future? Could there be any change?
I think so. I think there's I'm coming more and more round to the idea, and it took me a while actually to kind of get things up and running quite quickly. And it's something that I've never really, I suppose because when you're writing a book, you're always kind of thinking about what's best for the book and rarely thinking about what's best for the reader in terms of, you forget that a reader might not have picked up a book in a while, or they might be reading, this might be the third or fourth book that they read in a week. You're meeting people in all sorts of different ways that you can't really kind of imagine. And so actually getting to the hub of the story, the nub of the story quickly, I think is a really good discipline, because I hadn't really thought about the kind of need to kind of hook readers in, but I think the short story has shown me actually hook them in, hook them in and keep them there. And I think as a in kind of longer formats, you kind of just think, well, I don't want to hook them in. I kind of want to gradually lure them in. But actually, there's something to be said for actually making you up your game a little bit, because quite often you might go for a more gentle kind of way into the story because it kind of benefits you essentially in terms of your storytelling. But actually, there's something nice about giving yourself a challenge of, right, not only am I going to hook them in, but I am 100% determined to keep them there. And that kind of ups all of your game, I think, and really elevates it. And certainly in the kind of book that I'm writing, that I'm editing at the moment, that is definitely something that I kind of took with me.
That is it with Mike Gayle chatting about his new novella, The One That Got Away. It's a special Amazon thing, so the link for that is in the episode notes. You can get links for his other stuff there too, but on the bookshop.org page if you'd like to support us that way. You can also do it on Patreon and Ko-Fi. You can get in touch with the podcast, writersroutine.com. You can drop us a follow on most social pipes as well. And you've got a weekly... I missed last week, didn't I? You've got a mostly weekly newsletter that just lets you know what's happening, with a little bit of food for thought every week on our Substack. You can find the link wherever you're listening to, and I will see you next week with a brand new guest on the podcast. Until then, thanks for listening.